Hello and welcome to the WrestleTalk News. I'm Ollie Davis. Please press the thumbs up button, give us a subscribe, ensure you're subscribed because we've been getting some YouTube comments that people have been randomly unsubscribed by that dastardly YouTube algorithm. Leave us a comment and all that stuff. I'm Ollie Davis. This is quite a different version of the WrestleTalk News just because it's so hectic here on Thursdays now with AEW and NXT to review and make videos about that sometimes news stories get lost in the shuffle now on Thursdays. But this is actually a huge story. And it won't sound like a huge story when I say it, but you got to bear with me because it sounds like, oh, this obscure promotion halfway across the world has been purchased by a larger conglomerate. What does that have to do with anything? In reality, it has a lot to do with everything. It has to do with AEW. It has to do with WWE. It has to do with NXT. This is a move in the global chessboard of wrestling. That's that whole international wrestling war that's going on behind the scenes with allegiances and axes and just large factions. It's wrestling backstage stuff on a global scale. Now, earlier this week, Dave Meltzer said on Wrestling Observer that there is a huge announcement coming from New Japan. And everyone thought, well, that means it's AEW then, right? They're going to announce some form of working relationship because that seems to be one of those pieces of the puzzle that really should be in place for AEW New Japan to take on WWE. Dave Meltzer said, categorically, it has nothing to do with AEW. Don't get your hopes up in that direction. Of course, we all pretty much got our hopes up in that direction. But that isn't what happened. It has nothing to do with AEW, but that doesn't mean AEW isn't affected considerably by this. And it's the news that New Japan's parent company, BushiRoad, which is sort of a large Japanese media conglomerate that owns a number of other TV properties and intellectual properties, have purchased Stardom. Stardom Wrestling, many of you might have heard of it, some of you might not have, is the premier female wrestling promotion in Japan. In Japan, there is a huge subsection of female-exclusive wrestling companies. It's a genre called Joshi Wrestling, and usually you don't get many promotions that have men and women's wrestling in Japan. It's just traditionally been split. So you've got these Joshi companies that cater to that market, and that's arguably where some of the best female wrestling in the world takes place. And Stardom is the leader of that in Japan. And there's a sort of mentality that if you really want to get good fast, you go over to Japan, you do a few tours, which is 2-3 weeks to a couple of months of Stardom dates, and then you come back as this transformed performer. Bea Priestley did it, Toni Storm did it. It's where Kairi Sane and Io Shirai are from. That's where they made their name, really. Stardom, biggest female wrestling promotion in Japan, which kind of means in the world, really, from both the sort of commercial standpoint and a critical standpoint, just because they've got the best women's wrestling there, really. They really are fantastic. So this story broke on Yahoo Japan just about 6 hours ago, and it also made, to show what a big story this is in Japan, it was the front page of the Tokyo Sports newspaper. And Stardom's Twitter announced in the early hours of this morning, Stardom has been acquired by BushiRoad, more details to come shortly. And then a few minutes after that just said, for anyone unaware, BushiRoad owns New Japan Pro Wrestling. So that was about 3 minutes afterwards. It's not the best Twitter strategy, but still good stuff. And it's that they announced a press conference. The press conference was finished about 3 hours ago. There's a lot of news coming out of that. And it said that the article notes that a motivating factor behind BushiRoad purchasing Stardom was WWE's focus on its women's division. And in particular, name dropped specifically, was the WrestleMania 35 main event between Ronda Rousey, Charlotte Flair, and Becky Lynch. That is a direct influence on New Japan Pro Wrestling's parent company deciding to buy a female wrestling promotion. So you've got to think, this is all speculation, nothing's been announced this way, they're going to merge into each other, that New Japan are going to start showcasing female wrestlers and female wrestling matches, which is tremendously exciting. So here, and to further that, the other reports from Wrestling Observer say Takakai Kitani, I'm going to butcher a lot of names here, who is the guy in charge of BushiRoad. He's the head honcho of everything, including in New Japan. And Stardom's Rossi Ogawa, who is the owner of Stardom, they met back in April. And you got to think, well, that makes total sense. That's when WrestleMania 35 happened. It's almost like a few days after or a week after that main event with Lynch, Charlotte, and Ronda Rousey happened, BushiRoad directly go, yeah, it's about time that Japanese wrestling starts showcasing women's wrestling as well in our male promotions. It's, it really is time society's got to that point. But the deal wasn't completed until August. So we're looking at about 4 or 5 months here of negotiations between the two. So from the press conference, we'll get onto the WWE stuff and the AEW implications shortly, but the press conference had a lot of interesting news coming out of it too, where they had the entire Stardom roster on stage and sort of the corporate heads at the front of it. That's the thumbnail to this video. You see 3 guys doing a sort of shield pose at the front of this Stardom roster press conference. And they say that Rossi Ogawa is going to remain the chief executive officer or CEO of Stardom. So she's going to, or he, I don't actually know if they're a man or female, are going to stay in charge. So the promotion will retain its name and you'd think its identity, really. And that TV broadcasting, advertising, and global development will begin after the 1st of December. So you've got a lot of corporate merger stuff, paperwork stuff to be done in the next 6 weeks. And then they're really going to start kicking off these larger plans in December, which includes a Stardom booking on US soil. So in California, on the 7th and 8th of December, this December, at the Chara Expo, which is a noted position because California is sort of one of those American territories that New Japan have focused on. That's where they've been running a lot of their shows when they come to the States. It's where their dojo, their US dojo is. So that's definitely a strategic move, as it were, to get that Stardom wrestling in AEW and WWE soil. That's a direct move on their territory. Also, from January, BSN TV and Tokyo MX, which are TV stations there, will air 30-minute wrestling program, a weekly program of Stardom. So it's getting even more exposure, probably helped through Grease the Wheels by BushiRoad and the New Japan relationship or ownership. Then they'll have their first big show not the big show, but the first major event on April 29th, 2020. So next year, and that's going to be in Tokyo's Otta Ward Gym. And later that year, throughout the whole year actually, they say Stardom are going to run Korakuen Hall, which is one of the bigger Japanese wrestling venues, 14 times. And interestingly, in August, 2 of those dates will be on consecutive days, August the 8th and August the 9th. That's really interesting because New Japan, for the first time ever, are going to run Wrestle Kingdom over 2 nights in January in 2020, so in a couple of months. It's something we've been saying about WrestleMania for a few years now because it gets so long. Maybe it's better to split that event over 2 days. That's what New Japan are doing with the next Wrestle Kingdom. So if that model works, it seems this is going to be their second try at it in August, 8 months after, with Stardom, with a female wrestling promotion. Imagine that, a female wrestling promotion hopefully selling out a very large venue in back-to-back days. If that works out, that is a tremendous coup and a PR piece that you can spin. Now, and you've got to think that if you book a venue 2 days back-to-back, you're going to get a discounted rate as well. So business move-wise, it's a very smart decision if it pays off. There is also the risk of people going, I don't want to watch that much wrestling over 2 days, or, God, I'm only going to come out for one, I don't want to do both. Or, it could go the complete opposite way where there's such a high demand of tickets that both days sell out. So we'll see. There's also going to be, and this is classic New Japan strategy, they announced their Stardom's 10th anniversary show, because it was founded in 2010, for 2011. It's going to be, so they've already making plans for their 10th anniversary show 18 months away. So you've got to think that they've got some big ideas to really push Stardom out there. This isn't a cash grab thing. This is a deal that's been in the works for over half a year, probably longer. It's probably been in the back of minds and in boardrooms for a long time since then. You compare that to WWE's mentality sometimes, and we'll come on to that and how WWE have failed in Japan just yesterday, these reports come out. They kind of do things a bit more haphazardly, a bit more knee-jerk response, a bit more, let's run an NXT takeover the same day as All In, or All Out rather, and New Japan's Royal Quest show in the UK. Right, so another part of this is in the press conference, they directly addressed how contracts are going to run here. This is the direct quote. "We will create contracts with each wrestler. We want to create an environment where the wrestlers can concentrate on pro wrestling. And we are expecting to bring in excellent wrestlers from all over the world. We would like to listen to the thoughts of each wrestler and take those thoughts into account when creating this new work environment." We'll see how that comes out in practice. You've got to think that one of the probably the most valuable resource in this wrestling global war right now is talent. Really, you can have all the name brand value like WWE, New Japan, AEW, but historically, they aren't as important as individual wrestlers or stars getting hot and bursting into the mainstream. WWE is a valuable promotional name, but it's never going to draw as much as a Stone Cold Steve Austin, a Rock, or Hulk Hogan. It's much more easy to empathize and latch on to people as opposed to companies. And so when this works out, you've got to lock down that talent. And it's not just so you keep them, like, we've got these Stardom wrestlers for the next 2 years. It's also to take them off the table elsewhere. And where that is really, really significant is the depth of women's wrestling in the world. There are more better women's wrestlers now than ever before, much like you could argue for all wrestlers. I feel like the general wrestling level in the ring is better than it ever has been. But WWE, AEW, Impact, ROH have a women's division too now. They are all trying to lock down female talent, and there's not enough to go round. There's just about enough male talent to go round, and there's not as many female wrestlers. So if Stardom, New Japan, BushiRoad start locking down these female wrestlers, that means those female wrestlers can't go to NXT. We've seen it before. Kairi Sane, Asuka, Io Shirai. Those are just Japanese native wrestlers. A lot of other NXT signees have cut their teeth through Stardom. Zia Brookside, Toni Storm, Rhea Ripley, Viper. So the NXT UK talent as well. So that WWE cannot be happy about the idea of now having serious competition. Before, they could just come in and say, yeah, we're going to take her, and her, because they're WWE, and this is just Stardom. They're a very critically lauded wrestling promotion, but they do not have the financial backing or resources to really make the offers to keep those talent. But now they will, because they're owned by New Japan's owners, BushiRoad, and it seems like they've got very big plans to make Stardom a real drawing power. But also AEW, we've been saying for ages, the real link here is between AEW and New Japan, but there's awkward feelings there. Maybe New Japan feel like Omega, the Bucks, Cody, they left New Japan high and dry. There's also New Japan's long-lasting working relationship with Ring of Honor, which means that they will probably value that over moving to AEW. It's probably the right business move to align themselves with AEW, but, it's a different business culture in Japan where they do honor contracts and working relationships a lot more than a sort of more mercenary Western approach to deal making. So they'll likely stick with Ring of Honor, even though that Madison Square Garden event in April this year wasn't the biggest success in the world, and ticket sales have dropped off considerably for Ring of Honor since. So now Kenny Omega, who is sort of half in charge of AEW's women's division, and all the way through that launch, they were saying, AEW, we're going to lead the charge in real women's wrestling. Half of that is Brandy Rhodes saying, I like this person, this person, this person. And you get Britt Baker's, you get Nyla Rose's. But Kenny Omega, huge fan of Joshi wrestling. In fact, Kenny Omega and Kota Ibushi, who of course has signed with New Japan for infinity years, are two of the only male wrestlers to ever appear in Stardom. So, and you see these talents like Ryo, the current AEW Women's Champion, they are Joshi wrestlers. They're female Japanese wrestlers who would have worked through Stardom and these other things. But now BushiRoad and New Japan and Stardom are going to lock that talent pool off. They're going to want to sign those girls up. And that means Omega's plans have now taken a considerable hit for his vision of what he wants AEW's women's division to be. Unless this forces AEW to negotiate and bring them to the table, because Kenny Omega is a co-executive vice president, and they start working on a proper relationship between New Japan and AEW. So, is New Japan going to add a women's division? Nothing was announced in this, but you've got to expect that's where this is going to head, especially with one of the quotes being that Stardom, and this is a direct quote now, from 2020, Stardom will make guest appearances at events hosted by BushiRoad. Now, of all the events that BushiRoad run, you've got to think that New Japan is the most obvious fit there. So I can definitely see next year we get Stardom matches featuring on large New Japan shows, which is a huge sort of milestone in the company's development. They haven't ever really focused on women's wrestling before. That was one of the big sticking points between Kenny Omega and New Japan management. He really lobbied hard to get women's wrestling matches on New Japan, but it just never worked out the way he wanted to in the end. And you got to think maybe that's, if he's so passionate about that, and that's a cornerstone of his AEW role, maybe that played into his decision to leave New Japan earlier this year, or late last year. No, it was earlier this year. God, what a long year it's been. So I've got to think that means that New Japan events will at least start having showcase matches, and you've got to think that is the foot in the door for an eventual women's division in New Japan. Maybe a women's division that sort of feeds symbiotically with Stardom. So that's a huge development. Now, yeah, ROH now will take that Stardom link through the New Japan relationship, you've got to imagine. And NXT and WWE's talent scouts have now got a lot more competition on who they on who they can sign up. Speaking of WWE, just yesterday it came out that WWE is trying to make moves in the Japanese market. This has been a rumour for years. It's always been Triple H's big master plan. He called it something like global localization in one of those big investor calls, which is where he wants to roll out the territory system in the world. So in the 80s, the territory system was in the States, the United States, and you would have individual states and they'd each have their own wrestling promotion. He wants to turn the world into America, really, which, you know, pretty much has been done. And each country will now be a state. That's why we've got NXT UK. Back when those initial NXT UK launch things were happening, there were also talks of NXT Germany, NXT Mexico, NXT Japan. And for whatever reasons, it's only the UK one that's been launched, and there is huge question marks over whether that has been a successful business move. Personally, I don't think it has. I think it's been bad for the independent scene in Britain, as we've seen with, you know, the closure of Defiant and Southside and many other really good wrestling promotions here, and how WWE have been pulling their talent, like their contracted talent, so they can only work NXT shows. And it hasn't been good for NXT either, because NXT UK, who's really watching it? I know there's a fan base out there, and they have great matches with great wrestlers, but there's only so much WWE can take after a while, even if it is in the form of NXT, and you've also got NXT to watch. So, part of Triple H's grand global, localization global, whatever the hell it's called, is to go to these different countries and start up NXT promotions. Really, WWE's the more recognizable brand name. There's an argument for those should be called WWE Japan, but I guess they see WWE as the global brand. NXT is your friendly neighborhood, your local friendly neighborhood wrestling promotion, when really it's, owned by Starbucks. It's like calling your chain of Starbucks down the road and saying, no, that is definitely a boutique coffee shop run by Janice and Steve who live on the estate. And Starbucks just put maybe some nice exposed light bulbs and some succulent plants somewhere. I'm probably showing the sort of coffee shop I prefer there, betraying my own allegiances. It's hard to speak uninterrupted for about 20 minutes and not ramble and rant off. Anyway, back to what I was saying. One of these things is NXT Japan. And there's been moves to do it for ages, and Dave Meltzer on Wrestling Observer Radio revealed yesterday that WWE officials have been actively talking to a number of Japanese companies. So, and the only one named there was Pro Wrestling Noah. Of course, one of the, I guess it's the second biggest wrestling promotion in New Japan, male-wise. You've got New Japan, obviously, which is, I understand, quite far and away at the top. Then I'd say you've got Pro Wrestling Noah, Dragon Gate sort of slightly below that, or maybe on the same level, and All Japan Pro Wrestling as well, which used to be huge but has sort of tailed off over the years. All still very good promotions with excellent matches, but there's only so much room at the top. So Dave Meltzer said one of these was Pro Wrestling Noah, and the idea would be the foundation. WWE would buy it, and that would be the foundation of NXT Japan. Just like we've got NXT UK, where the plan would be to build a performance center in Japan, just like there's one in the UK, which is honestly, legitimately, weirdly, about a 10-minute drive from my house. It's just up in North London. It freaks me out that Triple H could sometimes physically be just 10 minutes away from my bedroom, in a car at least. And that they would hire top Japanese talents to work as trainers and wrestlers. And they'd just do the same thing. You'd have this NXT Japan promotion that will create Japanese talent, and they'll feed into NXT in the States, which will feed into WWE. It's just feeder system after feeder system and multiple chances for WWE to change their working style and flatten them out into that sort of Starbucks, everything tastes the same, and also a slightly bit crappy version of that lovely coffee you once had in a independent store. However, Pro Wrestling Noah said no. They said no. They said, we're not going to do that. And the talks fell apart. A deal couldn't be reached, is what Meltzer said. So that's an interesting defeat, I would say, for WWE, especially the day before New Japan announced that they have solidified their own position in the Japanese wrestling market. You've got Stardom, New Japan. They are now one force. That is a harder force to go up against than if they were separate. The whole idea behind a lot of, strategic, both corporate and in war, is the old divide and conquer mantra. You want your enemies to be separate. The last thing you want to happen is for them to start banding together against you. And that's definitely what's happened with Stardom and New Japan and their BushiRoad owning company. And now you can't even, now Pro Wrestling Noah are even saying no. And, if they've talked to a number of other Japanese promotions about a deal and nothing's come out with them either, maybe these Japanese promotions are looking at what's happened with NXT UK and going, nah, we're good, thanks. So you've got to think that I would count that as just, if we're looking at this in a series of battles, the global wrestling war is a series of battles, and the WWE have lost this one, and AEW have taken a bit of a hit as well, and New Japan have bunkered down in their home base. It's like they've added a whole new gun turret to their own fortress on their home base. It's a very interesting time to be a wrestling fan, a wrestling observer of the business, because I can't remember a time like it in the modern era, at least since I've been covering all this. Let me know what you think of the whole move, what this means for WWE, AEW, New Japan, in the comments below. And also, click the video that's just appeared on screen now to catch up with yesterday's video, where there's been another sort of WWE misstep in the firing of Eric Bischoff. Just 4 months into his tenure as the executive director of SmackDown, he has been fired by WWE, and they're going to have a different sort of, I don't know, someone else. It's Bruce Pritchard moving forward, but you can find out all the details on that by clicking the video that's just appeared on screen now. But please give us a subscribe, hit that like button, and I've been Ollie Davis, and that was wrestling. And now I've got to press end the stream properly.